Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Project Sanity. I'm one of your hosts, Brandon Sutton. Thank you for joining us tonight. Whether you're joining us on the Benjamin Dixon Show channel or the Project Sanity channel, I'd like to ask you to subscribe, like, share, comment. Only if you like what you see. If you don't feel inclined to. It's okay. It's cool. Everything's fine. Everything's great.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome
Tonight, I just want to have a bit of a discussion
Sanity.
about Bernie Sanders and Democrats, and I'm joined with my fellow. I'm sorry, but I'm joined by my fellow I really do hate those words. What are they? Conjunctions? No. Anyway, my fellow co-host, Richard Green. Come in, say hello, Richard. Participles.
Mute, you'll be able to hear me. There we go. I just wanted to say thank you guys for joining us. Just a little fluster back here, getting production done, and we are going to be hosting a special debate in Washington for Democratic chair, I believe, shortly after this, or it'll follow immediately after the Benjamin Dixon show, but it'll be on Project Sanity, so make sure to tune in for that if you want to check that out. I'll have more details for that at the end of the show. But go ahead.
That sounds amazing, Richard. And if you're interested in the way sort of national politics are, working out on the local level, this is a great opportunity. By the way, by and with are prepositions. I just remembered. We're also being joined by Adair Schmidt out in Washington State.
Well,
say hello, Adair.
Just a minute to get him up on camera here.
Yeah, because somebody
say hello. I'll be on camera.
Somebody ignored me today. Hello, folks. I'm eating ice cream. You can't see it. It's absolutely delicious, by the way. But yeah. We don't have much to say yet. I'm going to save most of my thoughts for our conversation later. So yeah, stick around.
Well, yeah. So, are you going to come in on this one, David, or you want to stay in the background in case? Well, okay. So we are also joined by our normally producer, David Grossman. He is normally behind the scenes, but today he's going to join us for this conversation. Say hello, David.
Hey, everybody, glad to be here.
Forgive these lower thirds and transitions,
man. Permission to show my face, man.
You're welcome. We have a stacked panel for everybody tonight. I'm so excited. So basically, the premise of this conversation is Bernie Sanders and Democrats. If I knew the melody for Benny and the Jets, I would be singing it right now. But I don't. I'm sorry. Is he doing more harm than good? Both the Democratic Party and for the progressive movement. For lack of a better word, I guess I could say America as well. So he's going out there, he's speaking on behalf of the Democrats. He had his town hall last Monday. He's going out and advocating for, writing a bill for a lower prescription drug price, importing them from Canada, going against Republicans on Medicare and Social Security cuts. And it seems as though while he's doing these things, he is being inundated from both the right and the left, or rather from the right and the little bit slightly less right, with people who are either directly opposing him, a lot of Republicans, or simply using his face and his sort of progressive street cred. Because let's be honest, there are still a lot of people out there who are kind of idolizing Bernie Sanders in a way that may or may not be unhealthy. And he's providing a very pretty face for the Democratic Party that seems to still not be learning their lessons. Does anyone have any comments?
I'll take this one to start. But basically, he's screwing himself. That's the long and short of it. That's the short answer. Bernie Sanders is basically enabling a party that really doesn't care about him, doesn't agree with him, and doesn't want to help advance his positions. I mean, let's look back, say July, when they nominated Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders. Let's look at, how they colluded with media sources, how they ran a blatantly racist campaign down south, essentially trying to say Bernie Sanders doesn't care about black folks. But let's look at the actual records and see who's done more damage to black folks, Hillary or Bernie. And now he continues to go and basically wallow in the mud with the most bottom-dwelling basket of deplorables, to quote Hillary Clinton, the lead deplorable, of the quote-unquote left, as Brandon called them, the slightly less right. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. He's not doing anybody any good. His bills didn't get passed. I'm sorry, but when Ted Cruz agrees on, hey, let's re-import drugs from Canada, and Democrats are saying no, that gives us a lot more information about Democrats than it does anything else. Dems don't care about poor people, period. Bernie does, and all he's doing is screwing. He's losing his street cred. Though, frankly, some people do have an unhealthy relationship with Bernie Sanders. He's a human being, folks, not some kind of mythical idol that you should be worshiping. He can fail just like the rest of us.
I think a lot of idols arose during the past 2016 election. You have Bernie Sanders is definitely the sort of progressive idol, and a lot of people have sort of based their progressivism on him. No matter what he does or says, he is progressivism. And if you kind of say, like there are things further to the left of Bernie Sanders, and not even bad things, not even the radical left, but just, the slightly less moderate left is further, there are things further to the left of Bernie Sanders, like viable things further to the left. And two, how much of this is just him kind of internalizing that same message we're also hearing about you have to work with the Democratic Party. You have to work with them because that's the most expedient thing to do. And right now we are at DEFCON 1 on the quote unquote left, or rather, and now of course the left is being defined as whoever is not with Trump and the Republicans.
But he literally, that's a different thing though. He literally has to work with Democrats as in they're his colleagues. Fine, I don't care about that. But you don't have to go out and campaign for these folks. You don't have to go out and lose all respectability that you had as a politician who didn't care about what the letter next to your name was, but whether or not what you were doing was right. And that's what he's sacrificing here. He's sacrificing, in my opinion, his political integrity by saying, well, I'm going to work with these people that aren't actually doing anything. And of course, there's things further to the left than Bernie Sanders, but that's the problem with idol worship. And that's part of the problem with the left. The left gets so enraptured with one political figure that they lose we lose our collective minds as a whole unit and fracture. Nobody cares about any of the issues. All they care about is, well, this one person said this. And we saw that with the blind hero worship that we had with Hillary Clinton. You still have Hillary Clinton folks out there beating the drum, but where the hell is she? She's in the woods hanging out with Sasquatch and her mythical presidency. That's what she's doing. She hasn't done anything for anybody since the election. And the left has this incredibly odd relationship of hero worship with people that A, don't deserve it, or B, those that do deserve that kind of, at least, some level of admiration, overdoing it to the point where it becomes fanaticism and we don't get anything done.
Well, I want to open this conversation to other people, but I do want to say it's actually pretty interesting, that dynamics you just described, right? So the DNC and the main Democratic establishment basically martyred Bernie Sanders in the primary. Like, no matter what you want to call it, they tipped the scales in favor of Clinton. They rigged it. They did X. At this point, the language is just obfuscating whatever happened, and it's not being helpful. It's semantics, rather. And so they martyred him, and now they're using him as a symbolic image to get people behind them, the people who normally wouldn't be behind them. And same thing what they did in the general election, but now it seems to be working better because they're putting him out as the symbolic head of their party. They're pushing him out there to speak on these issues that they are not really even in favor of. I think we saw that with the drug prices. They're just simply from progressivism just not in favor of those things because their corporate donors are.
They're not even putting him out as a symbolic head. They're just putting him out there and saying, hey, show up because Bernie's here. So because Bernie's here, that automatically means this is the best thing ever. But that's literally it. Like, that's what they're doing, is they're just putting a pretty face on terrible policy and terrible ideas and saying, well, Bernie's here. And so when you say Bernie's here, of course, thousands of people are going to show up. I would still go and watch Bernie speak. The guy has some really great ideas and is a really great speaker. But what's happening, what we're seeing happen is Bernie shows up and then they're saying, oh, well, Bernie supports all these things that we're doing, even though he clearly doesn't. But nobody seems to give a damn.
Well, see, okay, so I want to bring David in here because he seems like he has something to say, but I will say this. It's like they're not so much putting a pretty face on bad policies, but because Bernie is out there espousing his own policies. They're just using Bernie and his own policies as a mask for their own terrible policies, which is kind of
That's hilarious. It. They're putting a pretty face on terrible policy.
It's a bait and switch. Like you go out there to see Bernie and then they give you Chuck Schumer. You're like, oh my gosh. You had something to say?
Yeah, so I think that I think if you think about it from their perspective, they're going, the establishment's looking at this as an acknowledgement that Bernie's following continues to have momentum. It's not going away just because he didn't win the primary. And so if they're looking at it, they're trying to control this. It's not going to work. It's not working, but they're trying to control it. And the only reason that it looks like it might be working a little bit better than it did in the primary is because Bernie doesn't have a Hillary Clinton and her entourage or clique to deal with at the same time. So it has the appearance, I think, of looking like it's working because there's not as much infighting, at least not publicly voicing itself. But it's still there. And just because mainstream media is not, showing everything that's going on doesn't mean it's not happening. Doesn't mean that people still believe in what Bernie stood for, but they're not, but just like they weren't following along when he endorsed Hillary, they're not necessarily following everything that he says or does to a T, because let's face it, they're taking him out of his original word, which was, this is on you guys. I can lead or I can inspire, but it's not his movement. And that's one thing that I don't think that they don't get it, the establishment or the party itself. I think that they're choosing not to understand that and turning a blind eye to
I think it. I would say I would agree with you. I think they're being purposely obtuse, but I actually think that they're being duplicitous. So I think what this is that with one face they're putting out Bernie Sanders and they're acknowledging the missteps in the Clinton Wisconsin, not doing, not effectively dealing with Wall Street corruption, not effectively, the mistakes of neoliberalism. They're acknowledging the fault of neoliberalism with one hand because they've seen that is popular, because people are also agreeing with that. But out the other side of their face, their actions are simply not congruous with what they're saying. And so they acknowledge that Wall Street's a problem. They acknowledge that they live in a bubble and that there's obviously some stagnation within the party's leadership. Then they elect Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And it goes, paying attention, and they look at, oh my God, did you see that? They just said that, acknowledge the stagnation with the party. And then, but they didn't do anything about it. And that has largely been the Democratic policy for a while. Acknowledge the problem, pay token lip service to it, but do nothing to solve it. And in fact, keep going down the same path. And
they don't even go down the same path. They double down.
They double down.
Like, they sit here and and here's a great example of them doubling down on what screwed them over in the first place. And it's back to that healthcare bill, right? It's back to that, well, let's import drugs from Canada. And the Democrats be like, ha, 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 no, we're not going to do that. We're going to bow down to the fact that we got, hundreds of thousands of dollars in most cases from pharmaceutical companies in the form of campaign donations, and are just going to roll with it. They're not actually going to go through with their campaign promises. And then when we ask why did you vote no on this, they give some BS answer, and everyone's just supposed to lap it up. I mean, it's absolutely mind-numbing. You see it over and over again. Here's a really good example that happened to me personally. Real quick.
One second. Are you implying that Canada's drugs are safe?
Obviously, they're safe.
Are you implying that? Are you trying to say? Not implying. Now you're saying. You're asserting. Are you saying?
I'm asserting Canadian drugs are safe. They're probably better than ours.
Has a better healthcare service than we do. Largely by having single payer, obviously, and not having a for-profit healthcare industry that puts people's lives in the hand of corporations. Are you implying that Canada might be a little bit more? I don't know what in their administration of drugs and drug safety in America?
Absolutely.
Whose FDA is severely underfunded, by the way.
Let me put it to you like this. This is what I love about Dems.
Canadian right now. It's like Canadian.
This is what I love about Dems. I go to a healthcare rally. I spoke at a healthcare rally over the weekend. It was a great rally. Guess who showed up? Congressman Denny Heck, the congressman of this particular congressional district here in Washington State. You know what? So he's like, "Hey, can I speak?" When he was told, "No, you cannot speak. This is not a partisan thing. This is simply a healthcare thing." You know what he did? He left. The moment he wasn't going to be able to come up on stage unannounced and get all the shine that he wanted, He walked away and said, well, you know what, you guys, and I just won't play. I won't stick around. I'm not going to listen to my people's concerns because I can't talk. It's not your damn job. That's not your job. Your job is not to talk. Your job is to shut up, listen, and do what we want you to do. And that's what Democrats are about. They're big children. They complain about Republicans throwing tantrums all the time, but Democrats throw the biggest tantrums I've ever seen, and they do it when their constituents don't let them get away with BS. It's garbage.
That's really interesting, right? And so we've seen this mindset echo throughout the for the past few months, that it's somehow that the voters failed the Democrats, right? It's the voters who failed. Like this sort of shifting of burden from the representatives. That's what they are. They are not leaders. They're representatives. And I think that is a very key distinction to make. And some people forget that these people are not there to lead us. They're not there to tell us what we should think or what we should do. They're not there to be elevated to a position of patronage over us, where they decide. We vote them in on a specific set of, and that's why people that the platform was important. Yes, the platform was important if they were actually representing us, but they're not. It's meaningless if they're not. But they're representing us. They're not leading us anywhere. And it's a severe entitlement complex where you can, with a straight face in a democracy, and I know we're not a democracy, but like for colloquially, we are a democracy. People understand us to be a democracy. And so if you're going to speak to people about this, understand that that's the way it's conceptualized. That's what you learn in school. It's a democracy. Obviously, it's a republic, Democratic Republic, and all the other things that make a difference. That they feel so entitled to our attention and our vote and our power that if they don't get it, they throw these tantrums. They like the voter failed Hillary Clinton. It's like, no, the voters can't fail the voters can't fail the candidate. That's not how this works.
Exactly.
Voters can't, the voters cannot fail the candidate. The candidate can only fail to represent a large enough portion of the population. And in Clinton's case, to understand how the president's actually elected, because obviously, so, but it's that dynamic, right? That they're entitled to the vote, and the Democratic establishment feels so entitled to these narratives about Russia. They basically feel entitled to their own version of reality.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point. Here's why I want to talk about this real quick, because you said they feel like they're entitled to their own version of reality. I think they feel they're entitled to business as usual. And here's something that I wasn't going to bring up for a while until I went through and had more things that I could lay out a much more beautifully painted picture. But I'm just going to go ahead and put this out there now, and I don't care if the Dems hate me for it. So, politicians out here feel that it's still business as usual, despite the resounding loss, despite the fact that Trump made huge gains in liberal Washington. They showed up to the local Thurston County Democrats meeting. A candidate did. And she asked the election board to launder money to her campaign. Specifically, she had run up to the contribution cap from a particular political action committee, mostly known by most of you as PACs. Mind you, this is not a super PAC, because a PAC can be in collusion with a candidate. A super PAC cannot. But what the candidate came in and asked and said was, hey, will you guys take this money from this PAC? Because I can't take it anymore. But I need this money, and so if you guys don't help me out, we're going to lose to somebody terrible. So I want you guys to take this money and then donate this money to me through the Democratic Party, which can be done because I am running as a Democrat, so you guys can give me as much money as you want, but I need you to take this side piece real quick right here and just launder it for me. Candidates are literally asking local parties to break the law, and local parties have been acquiescing from time immemorial. I mean, every single time these people come up and be like, hey, we launder money, these people are saying yes. This time it was turned down because the new executive board is made up by and large of people that were inspired by Bernie Sanders to come in and change business as usual. Yet the audacity that they have to ask a group of people to break the law to help them in a campaign is stunning. They think that there's no consequences for these people, and that kind of stuff has got to change.
That's an important point. And
Richard's muted. He's talking, but he's muted. Richard is muted. He's been talking.
I should be. Everybody should hear me now, right? Yeah. No.
Yes, you're good.
All right. I was saying that it's an important point that you bring up there, and that they're getting their model from the very top, from Hillary Clinton and from everybody that was supporting and backing that whole machine that coagulated all sorts of money and funneled it through state parties. And I'm not sure if there's been any follow-up to how much of that money actually ended up at those down ballot candidates that I remember during the primary was shoved in our face that Hillary was going to do so much more for than Bernie Sanders would. And we've seen what's happened since the election about who's doing what on the ground and at the local level, and even in the Senate. Obviously Hillary can't participate there, but she will be, as far as I'm aware, at Trump's inauguration, so she'll be on stage for that. But she hasn't been available
They're
for
friends
any
after
of these
all,
fights.
so.
Yes, I mean it's not one of his weddings, so it won't be entertaining in that way. But she might get serenaded by Toby Keith and Rascal Flatts or something, and that might Lord. Do it for her. So
wait, who's playing at Trump's inauguration? Because I know that Jennifer Holliday was supposed to, but then she got blacklisted by Spike Lee for like being like, why would you think that'd be okay? But
there were a lot of terms thrown her way, some more directly derogatory than others. But I mean, it was,
as far as I'm concerned, people like Steve Harvey don't belong. Nah, bruh, you a sellout, and that's the nicest way I can put this in on a family friendly channel. Y'all want to hear my real thoughts about Steve Harvey? Holler at me on Twitter.
Well, Mark Lamont Hill called him a mediocre Negro.
That set off quite a bit of ire, as far as I could tell from.
He got up in his feelings about it too. What do you think is going to happen when you sit up here and get buddy with a racist and want to try to defend him? Nah, bruh, take that Uncle Tom's Cabin mess somewhere else.
Well, okay, so I mean this, and it's like with this money laundering, and a lot of times when we talk about the corruption in the Democratic Party or even in Congress, we sort of abstract it out to be about money and politics, and I think that's a fair point. That's definitely true. Money in politics, money needs to get out of politics. But at a certain point, we also have to examine this at the personal level and really acknowledge that the people who are, the people who politics attracts and who take this money are inherently morally corrupt as well. So it's not enough to just, remove the money in politics and everything just, repeal Citizens United and everything, gets better overnight. We do, in fact, have to get rid of the Cory Bookers and Chuck Schumers, because if it were not money, if it were not super PACs, if it were not unlimited donations, it'd be something else.
It is something else. It's money laundering and a whole litany of other BS.
It's money laundering. It's guaranteed jobs, and then after coming out of office, and so at a certain point, our political word, pure money, attracts the very bottom of the barrel of politicians, or rather, in order to be, and I think, okay, so that's the way I want to phrase this. Having money in politics allows the very bottom of the barrel of politicians to rise to the top, because they are who receive the most money and are able to leverage it to get to these positions, accumulate more power. But we have to also acknowledge that these people, these Cory Bookers, are inherently immoral to begin with. They're not the money is not corrupting them. Like, they were corrupt, they're not doing they're not corrupt because they do corrupt things. They do corrupt things because they're corrupt. I think that's a fair point.
That's an excellent point.
The conversation has to be more than about simply money, and we do have to stop abstracting it. Although I don't think everyone's doing this, and point to people, and I think people are doing it for Cory Booker, and saying Cory Booker himself is a corrupt a-hole. It's not yes, the money is a symptom of that. It's an example of that. But this person right here is kind of a bad person. We have to start making these, a few of these moral judgments. Like what kind of person does this?
Can I take an alternative route? Can I push back?
Sure,
on
of course you can.
All right.
Of course, no. You don't have to ask. Just tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong, Richard. Tell me. Well, see if you're invited back next time.
See how long it goes after I press the stop streaming button. No. What I wanted to say though is, to me, like I mentioned this last week as well, and I thought about it a bit more. To me, DC and our political world is basically a trap house, and so I see it from a similar perspective as far as corrupting and the moral judgments that I make about the participants in it. The addiction isn't a powder, and it's not a rock. It's the power and the money, And so what you
but I got to push back on that because
let me make a couple more parallels and I'll let you push back. What you see is people acting like you would see addicts act if they were addicted to money and power, and politics was their mechanism to gain that. And so what you see with the Democratic Party that you guys were mentioning before about doubling down on not getting it, and what you mentioned about the way that they act, what you're seeing is addicts inside of the trap house where their addictive behavior doesn't have to be masked. They can say and do whatever they would normally do in the company of people that they think are approving of the same type of behavior, and as a result, you see the more egregious things, like Cory Booker and some of his votes, and then his defense, or the incident that Adair mentioned at the local level, and you see this with like the superficial appeal of, oh, I want to get better, but you don't see that substantive actual hitting of rock bottom where they're ready to actually seek help. But
real quick, Brandon. I want to real quick, Brandon, because I want to make. I'm going to make a quick moral judgment. The only issue I have with that is that, like, let's look at the actual options for people have before they turn to actually going and getting involved in that lifestyle. As in, people that do that are overwhelmingly poor and overwhelmingly people of color because there's absolutely no option. These folks are doing it just because.
Yeah,
they're doing it just because. Like, that's my only pushback. Is it's a complete different parallel. For most people, trapping is what you have to do, right? But these folks, it's what they want to do. That's what they want with their life. So they're going through. Politicians are doing this because they enjoy it. People they're like, yes, this is great. Businesses are going in like, yeah, this is great. I can buy a politician and I don't got to worry about it. They're going in that. That's their moral shortcomings because they're just terrible human beings. Period.
The thing I would say quickly before you get into Brandon is that that these people are the addicts, not the dealers. Like,
the businesses are just as bad. I'm just saying. The businesses,
when you look at them,
but that's the businesses are more. Business is a moral failing in America, but that's a whole other conversation.
But go ahead.
Neoliberalism has turned business into like a gang type of smash and grab mentality. But I don't know. See, I lean on both sides, right? So I don't know. When you deal with them, it's hard to understand whether they're being purposely obtuse when it comes to not changing. If they're just deciding that, okay, you know what, I don't want to learn any lessons. I'm corrupt. I'm evil. Whatever, however you categorize it themselves, and they decide not to change, and they're just doing this. They're just manipulating the sort of public opinion, like putting out Bernie Sanders, putting out Keith Ellison, putting out all these red herrings to demonstrate change, while they continue with the sort of intention to be as bad as they've always been, but just with a nicer face. Or, the sort of alternative point of view, which is that they do create a very, very effective echo chamber. And by that, I mean, when you talk about sort of to say Cory Booker voted against this bill that Bernie Sanders proposed that would lower drug prices. And his excuse was, well, he wasn't sure if Canadian drugs were actually safe. And through digging, people have found that the sources that he cited was this article written in, an op-ed article written by someone who works for a big pharma lobbying corporation, a lobbying firm. And they wrote this whole article about Canadian drugs, maybe not being the safest things, whoa. Think twice before you import Canadian drugs. And so they create this sort of feedback loop where you have corporations providing evidence to support claims that politicians are making, and they're drawing upon that, and it creates a very, very effective echo chamber where maybe I can't reach into Cory Booker's heart. He's wrong, obviously Canadian drugs are as safe as American drugs are insofar that they're not that different. But I can't say, does he actually believe this or not? But
he's either evil, incompetent, or stupid. Well, there's no other outcomes. He's evil, incompetent, or dumb.
Purposely obtuse. Like the point I'm trying to make is that they're
incompetent.
Like there is the ability to selectively draw upon information and evidence to support his claims. It shows that he's not judicious in the way he parses out information, obviously. But so he's incompetent, probably purposely slow. He's not looking for any deeper information.
I'm gonna disagree with. I think I'm gonna be halfway on Brandon's side, but I'm going to say that you have to remember.
By the way, we've got Nick from the takedown with Nick on right now. That's just talking, folks.
No, it's like so. I'm half with Rich, half with Adair, and Nick is going to be half with me. So he's 1/4 with Rich, 1/4 with Adair. And
I'm gonna jump in real quick though, and
let me say before
we're cycling through.
I was gonna say, like,
y'all are killing
Nick, go first. Nick, then David.
All right.
Okay, I think we're kind of reaching too far when we're trying to, characterize these people morally. What I will say,
I agree,
is that it's a common practice for people in the elite part of society to live completely different lives, and they are in their own bubble, and their reality is quite a bit different from everyone else's. It wasn't uncommon to hear like the gentleman class speak about the slave as though he was lazy and unworthy and unfit for anything. And then he would talk about how he doesn't work hard enough or he doesn't do this fast enough. But the gentleman has never worked a day in his life. He lives a life of leisure. But in his mind, his only relation to his servant is what they can produce for him. And it's always going to be ever more pleasure, ever more profit, ever more production. So when we start thinking about how people who are in elite parts of society think about the common person, a lot of times they think about the common person with, contempt at worst, and they just don't care, at best, so a lot of that is just, when we're thinking about how these people are going to govern, and they're governing and dealing in like power transactions between their equals, that what's good for the common man just doesn't come up. That's not necessarily a moral failing, per se. I just think that's what happens when you have a society that has become.
I would argue that as a moral failing.
David is next. David is next,
and then I got 6 words after. Or I got 6 words after David, and then you continue.
Okay, fine. David, go please.
So, I don't think that they want to learn a lesson. I'm going to take this back a little bit to what Brandon was saying about 5 minutes ago. I don't think that they're trying to learn a lesson. It's not an equal comparison looking at the current state of the Democratic Party and the state of the Republican Party under the 8 years of Obama. So the issues, and the reason I try to look at them is because one legitimately had an issue with their base and trying to meet those demands, that being the Republican Party, compared to the Democrats who don't care what their problems are. They're not. They are consumed by money. They're consumed by money in politics. They're consumed by their donors and by their special interests. And until that changes, at this point, I don't see it happening. But if that were to change, that would be a different dynamic. I think that they are trying to continue down the same path, but painting it in a different light. And they haven't gotten the message just yet that that's not going to work. It may take them 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 cycles to get that understanding. And by that point, it's going to be too late for them. But I don't think that they're trying to understand what happened. I think that if they wanted to, it's really not that difficult to get. They don't have to do a whole study like Priebus did for the. It's really cut and dry what the issues are. But I think that it's easy for them to run on issues that are primarily the things that they enjoy. They enjoy the money in politics. They enjoy their careers in politics, and finding excuses why they don't get anything done, while also pretending that they're fighting to get said things done.
Doesn't that sound a lot like an addict? I just wanted to, on Nick's point, I wanted to mention Betsy DeVos is a personification, in this case, the gentlewoman of the gentleman, in that example of, here I am completely disconnected from public education, but here, let me tell you how to do it. But now, go ahead.
There's definitely an aspect of like patronage or patronizing when it comes to our politicians. Like when you're talking about Hillary Clinton and the way she spoke of the basement dwellers and people who they really just don't understand how the economy works. this desire to make all these, the way stranglehold on the government. It's this desire to make things seem so much more arcane than they actually are. And I think quantitative easement was a really good example of this. This desire to make quantitative easement as it relates to student debt, this arcane body of knowledge. Like, it's just like you just can't understand it. It worked for the big banks, but it couldn't work for this reason, for reasons that I can't describe to you and you can't understand. And it's like, okay, well, why not? It's like you wouldn't understand. So it's like there is this desire of the elite class, the government pundit class, to patronizing this to tell the people what their own problems are, to tell them why their solutions to their own problem, whether they be single payer, whether they be whether they be student debt easement, student loan debt easement, whether they be universal basic income, simply cannot work. And their answers for why they simply cannot work are always very vague. They're always very divorced from any kind of actual or statistic or any sort of hard data. They don't want you to examine how they work overseas, because like these are not just flights of fancy. That's what they want you to believe. These have been done in other countries, right? What this sort of elite class does is they position these things as just, these are flights of fancy, they can't work, but we've seen them work, right? We've seen them work in Europe, we've seen them work in Scandinavia, we've seen them work all over the world, but they want to simply tell you. And I think the best example of which is why Hillary Clinton lost the election, at least in the rural America, was this mindset of America's already great, America's still great, America never became not great. This entire total divorcement from the reality that certain Americans are facing, where some people can't get clean water, but you're telling them that better. Look at those job numbers. Look at those job numbers under Obama. And you're working at McDonald's. Like, who cares if it's that kind of mentality.
I would still argue that a lack of empathy is a lack of morality, or the lack thereof to make a moral decision, especially if you're governing. If Betsy DeVos is frankly the best person to describe this, because she actively thinks she wants handguns in schools because of grizzly bears. I mean, really? Like, she makes absolutely no sense. It's completely disconnected, and the only reason she's where she is because she donated $200 million to the Republican Party. She's so completely out of touch.
Her whole family, just to be clear.
Her whole family, and is absolutely unable to make a moral decision on education. She doesn't care about education. What she cares about is making profit. She cares about making education profitable for people in positions like her. She does not actually care about the everyday average kid. And that, to me, is a moral shortcoming. And it's something we've been seeing in America since capitalism became a daggum thing. It's an issue.
We've talked about that.
Eat the rich people, damn it.
Yeah, we have to talk about that, though. Is that like reverse common sense? Eat the rich people? We talk about that, though.
No, so literally eat them. Get rid of them.
So people, despite Soylent Green propagating, or no, this is not a paid sponsorship for Soylent Green. They don't pay us here, so don't advocate for Soylent Green. No, but that's a good point. And the Betsy DeVos thing, something we're going to talk about on the main show, on Ben's show, about the Obama legacy. People are treating Betsy DeVos as though she is an anomaly, as though under the Obama administration, he didn't make it. His Department of Education didn't make it so much easier for the privatization of schools. Under Obama, look what went on in Chicago under Rahm Emanuel, and the closing of many public schools under the guise that, private charter schools, public-private partnerships are so much more innovative. The big I word, innovative, and they'll do so much better. So it's not as though Betsy DeVos sprung out fully formed, out of the foam. Booker
was on her side.
Well, and I think
Booker was on her side about schools in like Jersey or some stuff like that.
I think what's important is that what it does is they got us looking at the fight that they're having between each other, ignoring that we as Americans have settled a lot of these issues. We've come to a majority consensus. We're just waiting for them to do what we're telling them to do, and we keep waiting, thinking that they're going to do it. And even this is years after we've already seen the study released that showed that what we want them to do has little to no effect on what what they're going to do unless it happens to coincide with what they're already going to do. And to me, it seems like it's time to burn the shit down. And I mean, that's part where I'm at right now. Is like, and
they think we're dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
They're and I hate that. That's one thing I hate personally, from a personal level, more than anything else, is when somebody treats me like I'm too dumb to understand how they're taking advantage or manipulating me.
What do you get when you ask people about what Democrats are doing? You get BS talking points. You get really vague. Well, you know, they're kind of doing this and kind of like they regurgitate talking points because that's all they actually know. Most voters are absolutely uninformed. You ask the everyday average Joe, who's your congressperson? I don't know. Well, why don't you know? Why don't you know who to complain to when everything's going wrong? But no, you just want to complain anyway. If you're the conservative country bumpkin, you're just like, well, those damn liberals and black people. But if you're a liberal, you're like, those damn country bumpkins who don't understand anything about anything. Neither of you understand anything about anything because neither one of you is willing to get informed, and it's an absolute issue. But politicians are going to continue to walk all over us until we actually decide to get informed and do something about it.
Wait a minute. Well, and that's putting too much blame on the average constituent, right? Like, I think at a certain point, yes, you know, there is some sort of constituent responsibility that we all share in as a collective, right? But at the same time, we have to understand that, you know, there is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is designed to keep people confused and largely ignorant of what's going on.
That's right. You can't do independent research.
Well, even if you do independent research, you know, there's plenty of misinformation out there. It takes a long time to even come to anything like the truth. And on some things, you may not know what the truth is because everybody's saying something different. How do you?
Absolutely.
You know, it's really hard to say that you can find.
I'm sorry, but if we do it here in the limited time that we have a limited time in which we can do things and dig through things. Yet somehow we find a way to do it. I got it. It can be difficult and it can be hard, but still.
I'll be the first to tell you that just because, you know, we did some research and may have found out something doesn't mean that we're all the way correct. We can still be wrong and make mistakes all the time.
And that's great. But that's the difference is the ability to go through and sit down. And if you can only be lied to, in my opinion, if you allow yourself to be lied to.
Well, here's my thing, though. I'm just saying, you know, it's too easy to say, well, everybody's just uninformed because there are things on which the American
public. I'm not saying that's the only issue. I'm saying that's a big part of the issue. Is that the American electorate is uninformed.
I think we're overemphasizing.
I'm going to jump in here, and I agree with people are uninformed, and I'm going to agree with both of you. I'm going to play the middle. I'm going to be a radical centrist here and say people are uninformed, and Nick is correct. There is a concerted effort by the mainstream media to push narratives that are in some ways divorced from reality. And so it's not that they're uninformed, it's just that they're informed with the wrong information, right? I think it's not like they're...
I know plenty of people that refuse to watch news, period. So there's a lot of uninformed people.
Yeah. But that's fair too. But
it's not just
at the same time, it's not to say the news. I could, if you watch the wrong kind of news, the news does turn you off. I mean, let's be honest. The news is a bit of something that is, and rather, this comes back to my larger point. And the reason people don't watch the news is because politicians operate under this, or rather push this narrative that politics and what the government does is simply too arcane for you to understand. That for the average everyday, and this is going to come down to like sort of patronage political model that we have. It's simply like politics are simply too arcane. You can't understand what we're doing, and so you can't judge us. You can't understand why Obama did not prosecute Wall Street bankers. You can't understand why we can't have free single payer healthcare. You can't understand those things. And so if you're being constantly inundated with the notion that the news is full of things you can't understand, you know, politics is full of things you can't understand as a way for, you know, your Clintons, your Obamas, your Schumers to get away with sort of like their corruption. Because let's be honest, like the Democratic Party is big on this one. It's pushing forth this narrative of you guys are smart and you're smart because you picked us, but you can't understand why we have to take corporate money. You can't understand why these things, you know, why we have to go against our idea. They're just necessary. Believe us. And we
saw that's not the narrative I'm hearing.
Wait a minute. Let me come in and say one thing.
Okay. But let me finish. We saw this exact same thing mobilized by the Clinton campaign versus Sanders. This notion that she had 30 years of experience and that made her qualified. And like, and that was just it. Like, they set the qualifications. Like, they told you what she was qualified for. They told you she was the proper candidate. And if you didn't think so, you simply didn't understand what the qualifications were and like why they were necessary. When that's just not the way things work. But
I was just going to say, at the heart of things, you know, there's a lot of things in this war that really aren't that complex. And I know this is what you're saying, but at the same time, despite all the misinformation, despite all the propaganda that's out there, despite everything from the common things that are just said everywhere to the things that you're taught in school that are totally wrong, people still understand some basic things. They still understand that the government does not work for them. They still understand that corporations have too much influence on our politics. They understand a lot of things. They would like to see the government focus more on jobs and blah, blah, blah through direct spending. They would not like to see Social Security cut in any way, shape, or form. If anything, they want to see it expanded. They will want to see universal child care. People still, these things are majoritarian ideas. The problem is where the rubber hits the road, there's a lot of confusion. Some people believe that you can get these things if you can just get government out the way. And they're half right. Some people believe that you can get these things through government, but by voting for politicians that are against the policies. Okay, they're half right or slightly right in some way, but the end result is that none of these things become accomplished because nobody knows where the rubber hits the road, how to get them actually accomplished. They're all confused about how to get that done.
I agree. I
want to push back against some of the things that you said.
I have a quick statement. You can have more time. I have a real quick statement. I think you can have a lot more time. I just want to say that I agree with Nick right there. That the narratives being put forth out there are either meant to disengage people or frustrate them. So like, you know, just enough to decide to not watch the news, like, because like they don't work for me anyway. Like, why would I vote? They don't work for me. Or, you know, just enough to know what you want, but not know how to get there, or be told that you can't have what you want. And so it just becomes frustrating. But yeah, go ahead, Adair. Sorry.
So I want to push back against that idea that people are being told, well, you just don't understand, because especially with the Clinton campaign didn't say you don't understand. The Clinton campaign said you're dumb, or you know what, you're just wrong. But they also didn't just say, you know, I mean, there's just so much that goes into that, because there's this idea that, you know, people don't know what they're talking about. Clinton flat out said, well, it costs money to run for president, so that's why I have to take corporate money. They don't tell you, you don't understand why I take this, why I'm doing these corrupt deals. They're telling you, well, they have to be done. And the reason they have to be done is because, well, money runs everything. Well, if money runs everything, then who are you listening to? And that's a legitimate concern that people have. And that's part of what this whole misinformation factory is. And I absolutely agree with both of you that there's a concerted effort to keep American people with tons of disinformation. Fake news is a thing, though it's really not that powerful of a term anymore, because anything you don't like can now be called fake news. But there's been a lot of BS that's gone on. You look at it with Fox News. Fox News is a prime example of a news corporation blatantly working against the wants, really, of their constituents. You talk to a Fox News reporter and you just don't say that it's, you know, you can talk about a universal basic income and like, then a lot of times they're like, hey, you know what? Yeah, this makes sense, especially if they've lost their job to something like automation, unpaid internships, all these other things that are sapping jobs from the economy. When you actually sit down and talk to these people, well, this is what it actually is, and you remove that propaganda factor that a lot of these news outlets simply are. Fox News was actually sued over that, I believe it was. And they said, well, we're not really a news company, and people know that. Like, that's something, like, they openly admit these kinds of things. It's not anything new. It's absolutely ridiculous. So sure, there is absolutely...
I know in the DNC
the effort to keep Americans blind.
In the DNC,
let me make a comment on that
regarding the lawsuit about the donations to the party. One of their legal arguments was that people knew that the DNC wasn't. It's just a political promise, so they're not actually expected to adhere to any of their rules. Was essentially the legal term that they're arguing. But go ahead and get in there, Nick.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, throughout history, you'll always find that, you know, whenever the people are trying to change something that makes, you know, that gives them some sort of control or fundamental legitimacy in controlling their own lives, there's always going to be the people saying, no, you can't do that, because, you know, you just can't. You know, this is as good as it's going to get. Whatever situation, no matter how heinous it is, it could be slavery, it could be colonization, it could be like maximum colonization. They'll still say, well, this is as good as it gets. This is as far as we can go. You know, when there was feudalism, there's people saying you can't move beyond feudalism. This is as good as it gets. This This is as best as we can be. This is the most we've achieved. Like time will just stop right here. There is no progress beyond this point. And even now, where we are right now, we're still hearing the same BS. This is as good as it gets. You know, they don't say that about other stuff. They don't say that about science. There's always a new frontier. There's always something to discover. There's always a new place to go. And I think our social institutions and social structure reflects that as well. Nothing is set in stone, and you can't just get somewhere and then time just stops passing. Progress just falls.
I think that it's not necessarily a difference between science and our social structure. I think it's a difference between the way we conceptualize the role of the role and the capabilities of the public sector, right? So under Reagan, this sort of new virulent form of neoliberalism came about that pushed forth this narrative that the public sector can do no good. There are no problems that the public sector can solve that the private sector can't solve better. There are no problems that the private sector should not be allowed to try to solve. Like these very, very, key ideas that have now been internalized. And we've made the public sector, we've demonized public sector workers. We demonize, people who work for the government. Government workers are demonized. We lower their pay. We do all these things. And the result is simply that the public sector has become synonymous with stagnation, uninnovative, bureaucracy. I hear people complain. I was on a date the other a few months ago, and we were okay. I'm gonna spare the details of this date, but we were talking. Damn. And she was like, and she said a friend of hers worked for the government, and he was always complaining about the bureaucracy, and she hated bureaucracy. And I was like, what do you mean by bureaucracy? Like, what exactly are you talking about bureaucracy? She's like, well, the red tape. I'm like, okay, well, what do you consider to be red tape? Like, what is too much regulation? What is too much paperwork? What is the sweet spot? Like, do you know? Is any regulation, any paperwork too much? Any bureaucracy is too much bureaucracy? Because bureaucracies are old. Bureaucracy go back to ancient civilization. Like the Mayans had the first bureaucracy, if I'm not wrong, or Aztecs. That's not my specialty. The point is this: like, people have been fed these narratives that the government is full of these evil mechanisms that only serve to slow progress. That's why, it's not necessarily science versus public sector, but there's the public sector shouldn't be science that comes out of the public sector is simply less good, or less effective science, less effective research is done by the government than by, say, Monsanto or any of these other private corporations. Well, and we have to sorry, let me just finish up. We have to break. Part of this is re-socializing people, right? So people have been socialized to believe these things their whole life inherently. And part of this, the battle here is to break people out of these structures that exist within their mind, these mental barriers that are blocking the ability to imagine progress within the government. Go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
I was going to say, when I'm talking about where people will always tell you this is as good as it gets, ultimately, when you're in a situation where some people are benefiting immensely and everybody else is suffering greatly, it's in their interest to convince everybody else to keep the system that they're profiting from. It's in their interest to keep that going. And part of that is by making you feel like that your situation is unchangeable and there's nothing you can do about it, by trying to take your power away, by trying to make you feel powerless and hopeless so you won't struggle for something better. And ultimately, that's what it's going to be about. The struggle for a great mass of people against a few people who wield a whole bunch of power.
And I think Nick captures some really excellent points. We're coming up on our last minute here, so I'm just going to take 15 seconds real quick to finish my point and do my last word. It's just that today, now, with social media, with people, independent media, with folks tuned in because of the panic that was set on by the Democratic Party about a nuclear Donald Trump and what that means for all of us, and that the world may end and all these things. People are listening. People are more aware now. We have an opportunity to seize control from these folks at the top if we take it. So it's going to take a big movement, as Nick was talking about, and we've all been talking about a lot. Catch me on the debate on Project Sanity starting 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Standard Eastern. Go ahead.
Yeah, close out, Derek. Go. Let's give your last words.
You know what, guys? Basically, this has been a great conversation, but honestly, progress there's always room for progress. We don't stop just because it benefits one person. We have to benefit the majority, and we have to keep pressing forward. Don't let these people lie to you anymore. Call them on their BS, because guess what? You know what? You know more than you think you do, and you know a whole lot more than they hope you do.
Yeah, so I'll just have the last word. You can catch me on the Benjamin Dixon show coming up right after this because I'll be hosting that. I might be able to wrangle some of these people to join me there to continue this conversation. But the point I'm trying to make, and I agree with Nick, is simply that the best way to enslave people is to enslave their minds and to enslave their imaginations and to enslave the way they think about certain things. And so as we move into the next hour, I want people to think about the fact that a lot of the things that we take for fact about what the government can't do, what the government can do, what the private sector should be doing are not fact. They are simply interpretations and opinions that became cemented into fact by those very corporations that benefit. So, good night all. Oh, and I'm sorry, David, you want to say 15 seconds? I mean,
well, I'll be producing the next one, so I won't be on screen, but thanks for having me on for the little bits that I did add. And
sorry, David.
No, it's all right. I was preparing for our next hour anyway. But what I would say to everybody is just keep engaging and don't stay on the sidelines. And stay tuned not only for the next hour, but tomorrow and more than likely Saturday, possibly Sunday, we'll be doing some special streams to show the footage being brought in by our team in DC, Ben Dixon, Solomon, Noah, and a few others with them.
Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. See you in about 2 minutes. I gotta go to the bathroom.